Welcome, fellow Rotarians, friends, community professionals, and guests to the Rotary Club of Edina for this special workshop on the opioid crisis. I am so impressed to see that schools, churches, school boards, treatment centers, halfway houses, local governments, and police departments all have representatives here today to learn more about what we can do together to impact this local and national public health crisis. For those of you who are not familiar with our organization, the object of Rotary is to encourage and foster the ideal of service as a basis of worthy enterprise. We channel our commitment to service above self through our 5 avenues of service, including club, vocational, community, international, and youth service. Today's workshop touches nearly all of these areas of service as we leverage our combined professional expertise and experience to educate the community about the dangers of opioids and prevent further needless loss of life and addiction, especially among our youth. At the heart of today's workshop is the debut of a new online curriculum developed in partnership with the Steve Rummler Hope Network and funded by the generosity of 6 area Rotary clubs in District 5950. So, before we begin, I would like to take a moment to thank those 6 clubs and the following individuals who helped make today possible. First, Rotary Club of Buffalo and President Jason Nelson, please stand. Jason, you helped secure our last piece of funding to make this grant possible. Thank you so much. Rotary Club of Rogers, President Kyle Sabo. Where are you, Kyle? Not only a great Rotarian, but also became a close friend in this process. Rotary Club of Eden Prairie Noon, President Kim Ross and member Doug Lobdell. Doug served as liaison and coordinator for today's event. Rotary Club of North Minneapolis, President Gloria Howard, who joined our Merry Band early in the grant process, and also Susan Smith, who helped coordinate today's event. Thank you, ladies. Rotary Club of Bloomington, President Deb Newman and member Don Stiles. I can't say enough about Don Stiles. This guy is truly a rock star. Not only did he help me write and rewrite this grant 3 times in a record 3 days, but he also helped arrange one of our keynote speakers, his son, Dr. Stiles, and he also recruited a whole bunch of people to show up today. So, Don, thank you for exemplifying our motto of service above self to make today a success. Finally, to my home club, the Rotary Club of Edina, President San Asado, who graciously allowed me to steamroll over his program calendar so we could hold today's event. To past presidents Ann Platt and Jennifer Benarat, who served as co-chairs for the event, and to past President and District Governor Sandy Schley, who is not with us today, but who has been an early and often advocate for opioid awareness and for the Steve Rummler Hope Network. Thank you all. Also, to our amazing club administrator, Jennifer Garsky, I don't know if you can hear me, and Marty Cooper, our club administrator chair, and to all the wait staff, thank you for your service today. So, before we begin, let's take a quick look at the topics we're going to be covering today. We're going to start off with a quick history of the epidemic and Rotary's response over these last 4 years. Lexi Holtum will lead us through this new online curriculum. Dr. Stephen DeLisi from Hazelden will talk about addiction and treatment. Dr. Stiles will talk about pain management options. Our sheriff, Rich Stanek, will talk about overdose prevention. Rob Reynolds, former chief of police of Eden Prairie, will talk about opioids disposal. And finally, we'll have some interesting and compelling panel discussion. And now, without further ado, let's get started. I'd like to ask my good friend and mentor and past president of the Rotary Club of Edina, Ann Platt, to come up and lead us through the invocation, Pledge of Allegiance, and 4-way test. Ann?
Thank you, Josh. as Josh said, we are so lucky to partner with our sister Rotary clubs. It's just an awesome collaborative effort, and we really, really appreciate all of you who were able to attend today. And it wouldn't be possible without your assistance. You know, every day we hear about opioid and heroin overdoses, and so that is why we truly, this event came about to show that there is hope. So please join me in prayer. I'm sure many of you have heard this prayer before. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Yes. Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And now we will do the four-way test of Rotary in the things that we think, do, and say. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? Fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? Thank you. Please be seated.
Thank you so much, Ann. So, we have a lot of different demographics in the audience. Some people know about the history of the epidemic, some don't. So I'm going to go through this briefly. The opioid epidemic has been one of the largest public national health crises in the history of the United States, and certainly as big as AIDS at its peak in terms of the number of deaths. And as the crisis grew, many of us saw it touch the lives of those closest to us. It wasn't just those people over there or those people down the street. It was our family, our neighbors, our friends. In fact, two of my closest friends died of overdoses as the epidemic grew. Up in the upper left, that's Jake, family man, had a relapse, didn't get a chance to come back. Lower right, another friend, Robert, who I actually sponsored for about 10 years, had a great life, had a slip, didn't get a chance to come back. In addition, as a person who has himself been in recovery from addiction for over 16 years, I have witnessed firsthand the tragedies and the struggles of many, many opioid addicts. So for me, the story of the opioid epidemic is personal. Now a bit about the epidemic itself and Rotary's recent involvement. In the 90s, doctors and healthcare providers started facing pressure to treat chronic pain more aggressively, with advocates recommending using opioids. At the same time, Big Pharma began marketing opioids to medical providers as not addictive or harmful and safe to use for long-term chronic pain. And so, of course, over time, opioids were increasingly misused. On this chart, you can see the total number of prescriptions on the vertical axis and the year on the horizontal. It started at 76 million in 91, up to 219 million at the peak in 2011. For a drug as dangerous as a prescription opioid, you can imagine the correlation between this and the death rate. And this chart came out not too long ago, and it shows the direct correlation between sales and deaths. So I like to think of this, however, as a stage 1, stage 2 epidemic. Stage 1 was to the left of this line up to 2010. And you can see the purple line, those are the popular prescription drugs, oxycodone, hydrocodone, other synthetics, semi-synthetics, which drove that first green line of death increase over that period, 2000 to 2010. But on the right, you see a precipitous increase in the number of deaths. That was driven by a different dynamic. So in about 2010, when we saw the peak prescription on the last chart, that's when excessive prescribing began to get cracked down on. As people, as the supply tightened up and demand was still there, people started to go to the street. As they started to go to the street, the cartels, the drug dealers realized there was profit to be made. The drugs were strengthened. They used things like fentanyl, which is 30 to 50 times more powerful even than heroin. And the death rate rose 50% from 2010 to 2015. And that's where you see this dynamic here. In the national stage, just this last year, we finally got some action from the federal government with the president declaring opioid epidemic a national public health emergency. The Justice Department has begun to target opioid manufacturers for damages due to the crisis. State governments have been doing this as well, much like they did with tobacco producers. And in fact, in the legislature here, just recently someone introduced a tax on opioids to help fund addiction and treatment and overdose prevention. I don't know if it's passed, I don't think it's passed, but it's in the legislature right now. And of course, all of this folly and death over this last study, opioids have no real advantage over non-opioids. This was the last clinical study that came out recently. So it's very disconcerting. For us in Rotary Club of Edina in 2014, shortly after Steve Rummler passed away, the Steve Rummler Hope Foundation was created. Sandy Schley and Steve Rummler's mom were very good friends, and we started an early partnership with them that has been very fruitful. So in 14, I call it phase 1, we co-funded a public awareness video called Steve's Story. We had 6 other clubs in the district that participated in this grant. And actually, multiple versions of the video were created, including one that has a foreword by William Moyers. It's actually for Rotarians to use, and that was done in partnership with Hazelden as well. So thank you to Hazelden. Because of the groundswell from the video and advocacy from people like Lexi, Steve's Law was also passed that year, which allowed first responders to carry naloxone. I talked to the sheriff here before the presentation, and Minnesota was one of the first states in the country to do this. It also allowed for the people reporting overdoses to have immunity from prosecution in case they were on probation and were afraid to report that their friend was overdosing next to them. So 2 benefits. In 17, we followed up. PBS was interested in airing the video nationally, which was a big deal. And so we needed to create a longer video, an updated video. Again, we made our rounds. Rotary clubs always respond to need, and I want to say again how grateful I am to the heart of service that lives in Rotary. But these 9 clubs stepped forward to make this happen. And again, it happened in just like a week or 2, we had the money. So Rotary really takes action. Also that year, just last year, the Twin Cities Film Festival featured Steve's Story. They had a special Rotary event that many of us went to, and Lexi herself was honored with Changemaker of the Year award. And then finally this year, we funded this online curriculum and workshop happening today. 6 clubs that I mentioned earlier stepped forward and a district grant, and that's how we got to today's program. So, now it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Lexi Holtum, Executive Director and Lobbyist of the Steve Rummler Hope Network, who has been with the foundation since its inception. Lexi was instrumental in the passage of Steve's Law and the 2015 legislation enabling first responders to have the resources they need to prevent further opioid overdose deaths. Lexi is also responsible for the creation of their organization's overdose prevention program and for fostering partnerships with hospitals, treatment centers, sober houses, and community organizations like Rotary in order to further reduce tragic deaths from the opioid crisis. In addition to the contributions Lexi is making on the local stage in Minnesota, she's also a sought-out speaker and advocate on the national level. Lexi's testimony in Washington, D.C. has given a much-needed perspective to agencies like the CDC, FBI, DEA, and FDA in order to push for necessary changes to our country's current prescribing practices, to the treatment of addiction and available prevention resources. Lexi began her work with the foundation shortly after her fiancé Steve Rummler's tragic death from opioid overdose, and she herself is in recovery from the disease of addiction. And most importantly, Lexi is a proud mother of one beautiful daughter, Isabella. Please help me welcome Lexi Holtum.
So hi, I'm going to unclip the mic and kind of rearrange myself so I can walk around. I want you to know that I did not write that bio, and a former board member wrote it for me, and he's no longer with us, but I mean in body. And it makes me sound really big and important, but the reality is that nothing that I do in a bubble by myself. And so with that, I want to acknowledge my incredible board of directors. I mean, they are outstanding, and many of them are in the room right now. And without their good direction and setting the stage for what do we want to achieve, I wouldn't be able to do the work that I do. And then also my staff is extraordinary, and one of them happens to be in the room, and even though it embarrasses him terribly, I have to have him stand up and be acknowledged. This is Sean O'Donnell, and as we've grown over the years, one of the things that my board has tasked me with is really developing the ability to delegate. And so what I did was I delegated to Sean and to our amazing videographer, Zach Peterson of Zach Peterson Production, who has done all of the Rotary-sponsored films and all of our prescriber education films. I delegated to the two of them, this is what we want, this is what we want to create, this is what Josh envisioned, and what Rotary envisioned, and where we want to go next. And it's really due to the good work of Sean that it came out so beautifully. So thank you, Sean. And then Josh, you are an extraordinary individual, and I didn't hear you thank yourself. So I just want to tell you I'm honored to work with you, and this has been such a great opportunity and a journey for me to learn and grow from somebody who has such great skill at bringing together, and of course, Don Stiles too. And then our panelists here. I have the privilege of working with all of them on an ongoing basis, and it is just incredible. And all of you in this room, thank you for showing up today, because I'm assuming somebody like me would have been very happy to have hopped on a bicycle and gone for a bike ride this afternoon instead of coming in to talk about this really incredibly tragic topic. So I'm so grateful, because the intent of this particular video, and Sean is going to assist me today. He's going to click through. He's also a tech genius. And if any of you have any ideas, no, you can't steal him from us. We need him. But he's going to click through in case there's any breakdowns. He can fix it for me. So the intent of this particular curriculum was so that all of you would become ambassadors for change. So the intent of this video is so that all of you take this curriculum and go back into your communities, your work environments, your students or parents, colleges and churches and communities, and of course Rotary, and bring it to them. And bring it to them. The transformation that we need as a nation cannot happen top-down only. And we're doing some great things, and I'm not going to talk about the great things in the medical community that we're doing, because we could be here for probably about 2 weeks to get through all of the information that's occurring. So with that, I think we'll just go ahead and pop into, Sean, would you start with the page where they log in?
Yeah.
Great. So on your tables, you have a couple things. One, you have these postcards. We printed 1,000 of them for you all to leave with, as many as you want today. And it has the link to the online learning module on it. It also has some thank yous, and I think it has our information, so that if you want to get in contact with us, if you want one of our board members to come out to your community to do this for you, if you want myself to come, or one of our staff, or Rotary, we can provide somebody to assist you, or come and lead this. So this is what the login page looks like, and I hope that you take the information and actually go home and play with it. Try playing with it today. If you have any issues with any of it, call Sean. Thanks, Sean. So that's as simple as it is. And the truth is that you could just hit submit and not put any information in and get to the resource. We want the information so we know where are we reaching, what communities are we impacting. Okay, so go to the start. So this is the home screen, and it talks about this video we're calling, or this online learning module we're calling The Truth About Opioids. And this is where you start. So when you go out into community, you have also on your table a discussion guide. That discussion guide, we're going to talk about what's in it a little bit later. And then you have a resource guide. You can print that, download that, or click on it and open it, either way. Okay, so now we're going to go to the introductory video. And I want you to keep in mind, everything in this you can modify. So if you really wanted to get up and do an intro, you could do the intro and skip this intro and go right into the testimonials. And even with the testimonials, you'll notice today we're not going to play all of them in the interest of time, but you can really moderate. You can use what you need and skip the rest. Okay? So we'll go ahead and play this.
Hello, my name is Lexi Holtum, and I am the Executive Director of the Steve Rummler Hope Network. Our mission is simply to provide hope for those with chronic pain and addiction. You might be wondering, why do those people need hope? The reality, the cold, hard truth, is that chronic pain and addiction, specifically to opioids, is killing our loved ones at such a staggering rate that it is literally classified a crisis. I could spend my time numbing you with the nearly unbelievable statistics, but chances are very good that you already know someone who has been hit with this issue. Instead, I would like to use our time to inform you of the scope of the problem, to show you how it reaches all aspects of society, to give you resources, to get help, and most importantly, to urge you to stand up and fight, so that what happened to me and to so many of my friends, which is the tragic loss of someone we deeply loved, does not happen to you. Let's begin with an interactive quiz to explore the subject and to see what you might already know.
Okay, so on your table, everybody has this quiz. This is the pre-test for people to assess what they already know. So you have kind of a lot of stuff on your table, but everybody's got one, and there are pens. Please take a moment. Don't think too much about the right answer because we're going to keep things moving today. Just pick A, B, C, D, whichever one you think is correct, and we'll go through the answers together in just a moment. So again, we have about 2 minutes. Speed answer. So we're going to keep walking through the module as you will see it on screen as we walk through. Again, you don't have to print this out ahead of time for people. You could go through this in a discussion format instead of having individual circle and answer questions. All right, so question 1. The answer, does this table want to give me the answer? A. So that is correct. The answer is A. And again, we're going to do a discussion piece at the end. So if you don't have the right answer or if you have comments about it, you can save that for a little bit later. Do you guys want to give me the answer to 2?
I'd say D.
D is correct. Jean got it right. We're taking Jean with us on the road.
The big one.
Do you want to give me the answer to 3?
Yeah.
B is correct. Great job. And how about 4? True, correct. Heroin and prescription pills are basically the same thing. Would you guys like to give us 5? All, excellent. And 6? 6? D, excellent. And 7? Do you guys want to do 7?
I think that Dennis has got the answer. It's D?
It's D, yes, right, Dennis. And 8? Do you want to do 8? Anyone? C is correct. Great. And 10? Do you guys want to answer 10?
10 is C.
C is correct. So if you got any of those wrong, don't worry about it. That's what learning is about. We will learn together. Okay, Sean, can you pop us to the next screen? So this next portion is, again, a preview of, it's just a simple history. And we'll go ahead and play it.
Now that you've had a warm-up on the areas that opioids affect, I'll give you a brief recap on how opioid abuse grew into a crisis. Opium is a drug derived from opium poppy seeds. Through selective breeding, we get morphine, codeine, and other semi-synthetic opiates. Morphine is then converted into heroin, which is 2 to 4 times more potent. Drug use and death from overdose of illegal opioids and prescription opioids have grown as a problem over the last 2 decades in the United States. Legal medical use of opioids had been used in the 20th century cautiously and commonly as an end-of-life pain reliever for diseases such as cancer. Then in 1996, Purdue Pharma introduced OxyContin, a controlled-release formula of oxycodone. The initial promotion and marketing of OxyContin was an organized effort in the late 90s to dismiss the risks of opioid addiction. Coupling a convincing Partners Against Pain campaign with an incentivized bonus system, Purdue trained its sales force to convey the message that risk of addiction was under 1%, ultimately influencing the prescribing habits of medical professionals nationwide. Decades of misinformation and lack of accurate studies have led to acceptance of opioid prescribing in medical communities, leading to new opioid formulations, including fentanyl, which is up to 100 times more potent than morphine. Today, opioids are still the most commonly prescribed drug. Ask yourself, have I ever been prescribed OxyContin or Percocet for a tooth extraction or dental work? Doctors aside, 75% of people who misuse opioids start their opioid use without a legitimate prescription, meaning those unused pills are getting used somehow. Once you're addicted to opioids, your brain needs opioids like it needs air. It's not about chasing that first high. It's scientifically proven that your brain has rewired its reward system. 80% of people addicted to heroin began their use with prescription opioids. And so here we are today with overdoses of natural and synthetic opioids tripling since 2010. Fentanyl-related deaths alone increased 540% since 2015. Every 3 weeks, opioids kill the same number of Americans as were killed in the 9/11 attacks. Imagine 9/11 happening every 3 weeks. And all drug trades, illegal and legal, get filthy rich in the process. Hearing this should make your blood boil. This is personal to me. A man that I loved and the namesake of our network died in 2011. Here's his picture. Steve thought it was under control. A man that once said that opioids were a lifeline came to know that it was a noose around his neck. Every 9 minutes, another photo, another family with another death in America. Where is the hope? The hope to ending this is you. The hope is in what you decide to do. Solutions have to come from all areas of our society. Let's listen to some change makers to hear what they're doing. Then I'll present some solutions for you to get involved so that you can make changes starting today.
Okay, so how many of you got 100% on the pretest? Oh my, okay, well, Sheriff, now, I'm sorry, but you're not, I'm not asking the question of you. He was copying you. Good to know, good to know. So that wasn't very many hands out there, which is why we've developed this, right? Everybody in here, most of you, I look around the room and I'm like, I know you. We've talked about this before. It's so great to see you again. Thank you for coming, right? And so many of you are in partnership with us already, or in partnership with the sheriff, or are in partnership with Hazel and Betty Ford. I mean, all of you in here are really, really smart. And if you didn't get 100% on that test, chances are that your loved ones who are gonna walk into a doctor's office every day, right? Every day. In every single doctor's office across the country, people walk in who have pain, and people walk in who have addiction. And if we are not ourselves knowledgeable about what opioids are and are not, and how they can help us or not, or harm us, then we're not doing a service to our society, right? We have to educate ourselves, we have to educate our loved ones, we have to support our prescribers, and we have to support our law enforcement and every other domain that is impacted by this non-biased equal opportunity crisis, right? So it's okay that you didn't get a 100%, that's why we're here. And then you can take it and educate everyone else. So this next screen is the testimonial videos. We chose people who were from different demographics that this society is, or that this crisis is really hitting. We wanted to make sure that it looks like everyone, right? Because it's harming everyone. So this is Marguerite, and she lost her cousin. And her cousin was prescribed because she had some abdominal pains. And she was prescribed opioids, and she ended up dying of a heroin overdose. And Marguerite raised her children, her cousin's children, right? And she's an advocate, and she's out there, and she's actually running for office, I think, right now. And she is just this remarkable woman. And we are not going to, in the interest of time, watch hers today. But I want you to go back and watch it, because it's a life, and every life matters, right? And she is an inspiration, and she is what you can be. She had no knowledge of the opioid crisis until it hit her, and what we're trying to do is get everybody knowledgeable about it so that you don't have to live through what she lived through. The next one is Dr. Chris Johnson, who is also a member of our board of directors. He was the chair of our state's opioid prescriber work group, that was through DHS to give guidelines to prescribers. It was publicized last Thursday. It's a great guideline, so look for that if you haven't seen it yet, and share it with your prescribers. We are going to watch Dr. Johnson's, and then the next person is Nathan Karanda, and Nathan is lost his brother. And out of losing his brother, he became a paramedic. And every day he goes on calls where he has the opportunity to save lives. I think he's saved over 40 individuals since he's become a paramedic. So he works out of HCMC, and he goes on calls every day. And then we have Chaz, and Chaz is actually in the room with us. And we will watch his story today too, and you'll see that. And I'm not going to speak to that because we're going to watch it, and he's here with us. Thank you for being here, Chaz. So we'll start with Dr. Johnson's, please.
And my name is Chris Johnson. I'm an emergency medicine physician. I live and practice here in the Twin Cities. I am on the board of the Steve Rummler Holtum Network, and I also serve as chair of the Minnesota Department of Human Services Opioid Prescribing Work Group. The reason the opioids are a dangerous substance in excess because they affect the breathing. The breathing slows down, and in high enough doses it stops, especially when combined with other medicines, for example, alcohol. And so an overdose looks like a person who's stopped breathing, and then if you don't get the breathing started again or get the brain oxygen, the heart stops shortly thereafter. That actually was less common than the other manifestation of the opioid epidemic, which is a person would come in needing pain medicine, and they wouldn't present saying opioid addiction, need withdrawal. Occasionally that would happen, but more typically it would happen chronic pain exacerbation out of meds. But I would like to point out to anyone in the audience, Everyone's opioid dependent. Literally everyone. I'm opioid dependent. Everyone is dependent on their own internal opioids for their function every single day. And these are what we know as the endorphins. Endorphin is the contraction of two words, endogenous, meaning made from within, morphine, endorphins, okay? And we make and use them every single day, and that is why that is how our reward system functions. And so everyone is opioid dependent. What happens in persons who have been on these medicines for a long term is over time, you distort your own internal reward system, your own internal opioid system, and it stops working properly. Initially, my action on the opioid epidemic was born out of frustration in the emergency department that, my realization that what I'd been taught that these medicines were giving people their lives back didn't seem to be borne out, at least not anecdotally with what I was seeing. The research that caused us to expand the use of opioids beyond just for acute injury and hospice end-of-life care was never robust. There was never good reason scientifically to start prescribing like this. And I became to suspect that the medical profession itself did not show good due diligence in its science and ethics in researching how do we know that these medicines are effective. And that led me to do further research and find out there was no good evidence. And so I became involved at the state level, and I chair the Department of Human Services Opioid Work Group. And our new recommendations that we've been working on for the last 2.5 years are coming out, and they reflect that understanding, they reflect that data. And so part of what we're doing to combat this is we are saying there's no evidence supporting the use of these medicines for chronic pain conditions. So clinicians, if you are tempted to start your patients on these medicines for back pain or arthritis, don't do it. Avoid creating new chronic and opioid dependent patients by avoiding starting these patients on these medicines. The number of prescriptions has gone down nationally by 10%, I think a bit more in Minnesota, but that's the beginning of addressing this. What also needs to be addressed is how. First, supposedly responsible, professional, and scientific organization could we proceed with an unvetted treatment that hurts so many of the patients? How did we do that? And how do we stop that from happening in the future?
My name is Charles Chan Smith. I was born in 1956. Prince Nelson is my cousin. We grew up together from little kids, started our first band together called Grand Central. He played the keyboards, I played the drums. We both learned how to play without anybody teaching us, and the rest is pretty much history. Well, we actually had a relative that was hooked on heroin, my dad's brother or uncle. And that's when I learned about it as a kid, about 7, 8 years old. He was never really around, and we were always asked the questions where he was and stuff, but that lifestyle started to permeate through our family, some of the negative parts of it. We weren't allowed to really talk to him, so that's where it started with us. All of us, athletes as well as musicians, we didn't want to play with people that were high and out of it. We wanted to play sober. I never even heard anything about him doing any kind of drugs at all. Until later on, many years later, you heard rumors, but I still looked at him and I was like, the dude is at the top of his game, is playing. He hasn't fallen off on people you kind of would know they must be into something, because I could tell. I can't tell you when it started, but it had to be around that time that he either had the surgery with the hip or not. Just imagine, the stigma is already crazy for regular people, but for people that might be famous in our society, it had to be horrible to be knowing that people are going to be heckling you, saying that there's something wrong with you. And here's a genius. Prince was a musical genius. You know, you think you tried as hard as you could when we did find out, which was after he passed. But the only thing it affected me is that I need to tell more people, educate more folks that are I don't care who you are, that if you have someone in your family that's dealing with that, give them some outs, not just, you know, make them feel like they're a piece of crap when they're feeling like already low as you can think. I mean, I know Prince had the highest of standards, so for him to feel that he was that low, for feeling like, for being in a position like that where he couldn't say anything and kept this horrible secret until he ended up killing himself, I would say to everybody, we have a lot of work to do as far as like, just reclaiming that we're all human and we all make mistakes no matter what our jobs are and what we do. And just basically, this guy had the best care supposedly in the world, and yet he slipped through the fingers and he's gone. You never get another one.
If there's anything that we can say from that, thank you, Chaz. And the opportunity is for you to go back into your communities and save lives. We don't have to continue to lose people like we are. So in the interest of time, I'm going to have us jump to the discussion piece, because we have a lot of panelists who are going to give you even greater information. Not greater, they're going to give you more information today, okay? So on your tables too, everybody's got discussion guides, and you all have resource guides, you have the postcards, and you have the pretest on your tables. The discussion guides, they're broken down into modules for different domains. So if you are a first responder, there's a discussion guide that's written specifically for that community. If you are educators, teachers, there's a discussion guide for that. There's a discussion guide for faith-based communities. There's a discussion guide for healthcare professionals and treatment professionals. And there's a discussion guide for lay people. So today we're going to do the lay people one, lay persons, and that is page, which page is it? 7. Page 7. So also in the interest of time, I'm going to divide the room down. This is going to be our middle, and this is going to be our half, this way and this way. So for you guys, I want you to answer as a group questions 1 and 2. For you all back here, 3, maybe this one does 3, and you guys can do 4. And then this row is going to focus on 5. And this one is going to do 6 and 7. And this row is going to do 8. Okay, you have 3 minutes to look at those discussion pieces, and then we're going to ask you to pick a person at your table to speak about it. So, Don, do we want to start with question 1, a response? If they maybe read it out loud, read the question, respond.
Do you want to read the question up here?
Sure.
If you had to choose one thing you would want others to know about this issue, what would it be and why? At our table?
We had several people share on this. I suggested that when it comes to addiction, the person who is addicted can't save themselves. It has to be somebody else to intervene.
Oh.
And
that may be true in a certain percentage of the time. I do know of a person, myself, who brought himself to treatment, and it's been many, many years now. So.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Just for people to know how easily you can become addicted. And mine is maybe more the second question, but that my 80-year-old aunt who had rheumatoid arthritis thought that she was told she could have pain medication as needed, which meant handfuls a day instead of limited 1 per day. So until she was in a nursing care facility, she was just consuming it like candy, and we didn't know it.
Question 2. Who's on question 2 over here?
Your question 3.
Let's go to question 3.
Did you guys answer 2? You answered 2.
Yeah, I was going to say I have a client who whose son was struggling with it. He actually started off in college. He had some injuries from sports, and he was prescribed opiates in college by the college doctors. His mom was telling me that they went out to visit him. He dropped him off at the airport, and his mom knew that he was struggling with him. And then she let us know that he passed away that night from overdosing. So it's I don't know. It's becoming more and more common.
Thank you. I'm sorry for your loss.
And Lexi, I would add, it's tragic because most addicts will get another chance at recovery. Not many people get sober the first time. But with heroin or opioids, you don't get a second chance. That's the tragic piece of it.
Our table thought about this a lot, and a couple of things. We have here in Edina, we have 2 large orthopedic medicine clinics. I want to make sure that we bring these cards over there.
Thank you.
Remembering that even vet offices where Spot might be prescribed some of this medicine, and then your little son might end up with the eating Spot's medicine. And then another thing that Steve here mentioned, that his lovely wife was prescribed a large jar of this stuff, and then was given a sheet, of course, about the ramifications, but really wasn't explained that you got to really be careful about how to use this stuff, like the young lady's grandmother or aunt there. So those are a few of the high spots. But bring these cards to schools, YMCA, physical therapy offices, etc.
Anyone else over here at this side of the room?
We were on number 3 also, and we had included other community event groups like the Lions, other organizations like the Lions, individual businesses, starting with the biggest first in your community.
I don't know if it's fair to interject a question, but I thought I heard somebody say at the beginning that there's a new study talking about the opioids are no more effective at treating pain. If so, I would suggest that ought to be part of this presentation. And to me, that would be the big thing. If you got a problem, somebody's got pain, and the solution has been opioids, then all those who are going to take it or those who are going to prescribe it need to understand the alternative, because they're trying to treat pain.
So I was just told that we're really, really, really tight on time. So we're going to pop to the others. But isn't this great, you guys? Are you learning something? And are you starting to have conversations amongst yourself that are kind of uncomfortable, but you're sharing, really, right? So that's the purpose of this. How many of you can please raise your hands and tell me that you're committed to bringing this back into your community, into your homes? Okay, I got a couple people whose hands didn't go up, so I'm going to hunt you down afterwards and talk to you. Thank you. Thank you. I was looking right. Could you feel the eyeballs? Okay, so we're just going to take 2 more questions, and we're going to pop to this side of the room. Who has a burning desire to answer their question? Raise a hand over here. Who's got something? Okay, we'll come right back to you. This one, and then that one, and then we'll move on.
Answer the question.
Yeah, I'm talking to both, because one's for...
All right, thank you. I just want to take a second to talk about actually my own personal experience. I'm a practicing dentist of 36 years. I remember when Purdue Pharma came into my office in the 90s with their pre-made prescription pads. All I had to do was stamp my name on it, as well as samples month after month, extolling the virtues of passing out these medications. Years later, I was in an accident, saw a neurologist, and that was my start of being on opioids. And I was on opioids 10 years. And so I'm not really answering the question, but I think it's more important to try and explain my personal experience. My surgeon, Dr. Tim Garvey, probably saved my life. He fused my neck and he encouraged me to get off these things, and he was very helpful. I can tell you though that the last day I took opioids, after that I did not sleep for 3 nights straight. It was almost unbearable. And my point being is, not only was it so hard, I had a great support system, but I realized those who don't, how easy it is to turn right back to the street or to their doctors, so on and so forth. And so I share my experience. It's humbling, but I think it's important to use myself as a small example, and we've heard many examples today, of what it's like to be on these medications, what it's like to get off them, and to encourage you all, like Lexi said, to go into your communities and do what you can to be a part of educating people, because you know, when you're addicted to these things, the treatment centers, the insurance allows maybe 35 days, and yet it might take your brain 5 years to recircuit itself. So my point being is it's really more about education, and treatment also, but education is just so important, and that's why we're all here. Thank you.
On with the show, we're moving on? Okay, thank you so much everyone for contributing, and I know that everybody else had important things to share. We will stay after and answer questions and help you, and I want to hear what your feedback and your comments are, and thank you. Thank you all so much. Give yourselves a round of applause. Oh, last thing too, the resource guide that's on your table, you can click on resources and download that too, and it gives you resources to treatment, to help, to everything, to videos, to sharing your own story. Please, those of you that have the courage to share your story, go on there and share your story so that it helps other people. Thank you.
Thanks, Lexi. The good news about today is this is the beginning, not the end. So you have all these amazing speakers available. They want to be used by your clubs to come and give these presentations. They've graciously appeared here today for nothing. And so I think this is, again, just the start of the conversation, and we hope you'll take some action after the workshop. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Stephen DeLisi. Dr. DeLisi has previously held positions as Associate Director of the Psychiatric Residency Program at the Rush Medical Center and Associate Director of the Chicago Board Review Course. He's held faculty positions with Rush Medical Center and more recently with the Hazelden Betty Ford Graduate School of Addiction Studies. Dr. DeLisi has co-authored 28 presentations and published abstracts, many of which focus on mindfulness-based treatment. He's also co-authored 3 publications, 2 of which focus and which are supported by the National Alliance for Research on Schizophrenia and Depression. Prior to joining the Hazelden Betty Ford Graduate School of Addiction Studies as the Assistant Dean, Dr. DeLisi served as a Midwest Regional Medical Director for the Hazelden Betty Ford Foundation. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Stephen DeLisi.
Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me if I talk into this? I'm not good at standing directly behind a podium. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for showing up on a beautiful day. There's sun in the air, and it's great to see everybody taking an interest about this. I've been in the field for almost 20 years, and when I started, there would have been maybe 3 or 4 people at lunch, and that's truly it. It was a wasteland of disinterest. And so it's really fantastic to see everybody here and to have events like this where we have the opportunity to give you information and then have you go out and disseminate that information to all of your communities. I'll be skipping through some of my slides because we're condensing to get you guys back into the sun at a reasonable time. So I'll condense my message to this. The opioid use disorders and the disease of addiction is a disease. It's a disease that is of brain chemistry in the body. It is a disease that is of the mind, which transcends any of the neurotransmitters that I'm going to bore you with. It is a disease that affects one's spiritual life. It affects one's relationships. It affects the family, the communities, the state, and our nation. That's point number one. Point number two is that that disease, like any other disease, has evidence-based treatments. These are treatments that have been studied. These are treatments that we know work. Treatment works. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. Number three is that the treatments have to be coordinated. People who have opioid use disorders, it rarely works to just have them go into a residential facility and then go back home. It rarely works to just use talk therapy or to just use medications. But you combine all of those together, you combine that with community and family support, you combine that with the support network of all of you, and treatment works. So that's really, that's my bottom line. I have been trained originally in Chicago. I was the chief resident of psychiatry when all of this started. And one of my tasks that came down from the federal mandate was to recreate all of our initial assessments to include an assessment of pain. Didn't matter whether or not you came in for pain. We were going to assess your pain. The problem there was that we really didn't have a parallel process of training us, the physicians, on how to treat pain well and holistically. And so what did we turn to? We turned to the medications, the quick fix, if you will, for acute pain, not differentiating that from chronic pain. I'm board certified in both psychiatry and addiction medicine. As I said, I've been doing this now for almost 20 years. I've been in Minnesota working for Hazel and Betty Ford Foundation, both as a clinician and now as an academician for 13 years. When I started, it was unheard of for someone to come in using or overdosing on fentanyl unless they were a health professional. Those are the only patients. Why? They had access to that, right? We didn't see access on the street. We didn't see the synthetic analogs of fentanyl that exist today coming primarily from China. So that has been a game changer, and I'm going to explain why in just a moment. Oh, I went the wrong way. I got it. I'm oriented now. All right, so here's the deal. You invite someone who, like me, who is a science geek. You get images like this, right? It's inevitable. I am on my best behavior, so I only have 2 of these slides. I will stay for as long as people want, though, to answer questions about this, because this tells a story as to why people can't just, in quotes, stop, or why you can't just say no once you have the disease of addiction. It is a disease that affects the brain, and we now know what those brain regions are. And there are different phases of addiction. There is the binge intoxication phase. That's depicted in blue, and it's color-coded so you can see that the center of the brain. Lexi mentioned the reward center. That's what is in blue. That's where you may have heard of the chemical dopamine. That's where dopamine is released and you get that euphoria, right? We all have that reward pathway in our brain. Every single one of us, because it serves a purpose that I'll talk about in just a moment. That's the high, if you will. Then we have the red region, which says withdrawal negative affect. And we heard a little bit about this. The gentleman, the dentist, who stood up and talked about not sleeping for several days. Some of our patients coming off fentanyl and heroin, they don't sleep well for months. It's a huge problem. So it's that pattern of get high and have the effects of the opioid, then run out, and then go through withdrawal and negative emotions and affect. And that's a red. Those are also that limbic emotion center, and we need to address that. And then finally, the green area, preoccupation and craving, right? That's the front part of the brain. That's what actually makes us mostly who we are. That's the executive computer, if you will, of our brain. That part of the brain is supposed to tell the reward pathway, chill out. you know what? I get it. That heroin hit you just did, it's got dopamine flooding through, and you're saying this is the most important thing in my life, because that's what that reward pathway is there for. It is there so that we pay attention to the things that are for our survival. The problem with the drugs of abuse, including the opioids, is it floods that system, and so then the system thinks this is the most important thing. Why do people with addiction neglect everything else in their life? Because nothing in their life is releasing that much dopamine in that part of the brain. The frontal part of the brain is supposed to say, don't listen to that. Are you kidding me? The last time that you did this, it did not go well. If the person has active addiction, there is a disconnect, and in fact, the frontal part of the brain becomes the slave of that reward pathway. And it is working overtime, but in reverse. It's working on planning, where can I get to my next fix? How am I going to get my next fix? Who am I going to do it with? Where am I going to get the money? That's that vicious cycle. And then it comes right back to that binge episode, then withdrawal, then craving, and it's this vicious cycle. I share this with you because it'll explain why we do the treatments that we do. I'm going to check my time. Okay, so here's the other image. On the far left is natural rewards. It releases some dopamine, you feel good, you're going to repeat that. The middle is binging on heroin. All of the opioid, all of the dopamine is now released. So you can see the middle has much more than the left, yes? As you use more and more and more and more and more, the body's response and the brain's response is to get less of the dopamine made, less of the dopamine receptors, and so then you're in a net deficit. So you feel even worse than when you first started. And there's the vicious cycle. It's because of this lack of the dopamine that you get the withdrawal, the negative affect, and then you have the cravings. So there are treatments. There are psychosocial behavioral treatments and evidence-based that we know work. There are mutual help groups, things like 12-step groups. There are medications used in assistance of treatment, and I'm going to cover those briefly today. And then there's treatment for special populations that we can talk about in the Q&A. Psychosocial behavioral treatments, they get at how did this start? What was going on in the individual's life? How can we help them develop coping strategies so that when they have triggers and cravings, they can get through those situations? How do we get them tapped into community resources and family therapies? This is what Lexi's group is all about, is getting you connected. And then we also do therapy to engage and motivate patients. One of the things we know is important is engaging people in treatment for as long as is possible, and then finally treating any co-occurring depression, anxiety, bipolar that's going on. This is a list of the most evidence-based practices. Trauma-informed care is really important. At Hazel and Betty Ford, we have the comprehensive opioid response with the 12 steps. We call it Core 12. It is utilizing these different evidence-based practices with specialized opiate support groups, with engagement and treatment over 1 year in duration, and with medications. It's pulling that all together. These are some of the mutual help groups. Most people are familiar with Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous. There's Methadone Anonymous. There's also the Wellbriety movement that comes out of our Native American community. There are the 16 steps. That's with Charlotte Castle's work around empowerment. And then, of course, there's also SMART recovery. These are the medications. These are the medications specifically used for opioid use disorders. I know that I'm moving quickly, but we'll have more time in question and answer. We can use methadone. Methadone is an opioid. It activates the opioid system fully, and similar to, say, a Vicodin or heroin. But where is it different? It has a very slow onset of action, and it stays around for a longer period of time, and it's not as strong. So what you're doing is you're substituting those more potent addictive substances for something that is more continuous and lower strength, so that the individual can start to stabilize. and can get back to work, can get back into the community. Then there is Suboxone. A lot of talk on the news about Suboxone. Suboxone's main ingredient is something that, again, binds to that opioid receptor, but only activates it partially. So you never get the full effect that you would from a heroin or a fentanyl or even a methadone. You can't get the full effect because the Suboxone just doesn't get to that point. Where's the advantage there? It stays on that opioid receptor, and then if someone is trying to use something else, it can't get on, and you can't get the effect. With one notable exception, and that's fentanyl. Fentanyl likes the opioid receptor even more than Suboxone. Fentanyl is what keeps someone like me awake at night. Because I have someone who's stable on Suboxone or stable on the next medicine, naltrexone, which is blocking that opioid receptor. What happens? They use fentanyl, it pushes that off, and suddenly they're in overdose. That's what keeps me awake. This just speaks to each of the different medications. You can see how methadone is sitting right on the opioid receptor, and the heroin can't get on there. Same thing with the buprenorphine and the Suboxone. And then naltrexone is a medicine that just simply blocks the opioid receptor. It can't get activated. So there's nothing, it doesn't cause any euphoria, it doesn't cause any cravings. And then my final slide is, you guys have heard of Narcan. The first responders, our sheriff's department, they carry the Narcan to help someone who's overdosed. In an overdose, this is what's happened. They got heroin and it's sitting right on that receptor and it's suppressing their breathing, right? You give them Narcan and this is what happens. It goes on and the heroin comes off and then they come out in immediate withdrawal. That's how that works. So there are resources. I can put this back up during the Q&A, and then also Lexi has resources. These are numbers that you can share for yourself and for others, so that if you've got someone who needs help, just to call and to start the process and to get the help. So thank you.
Thank you.
It's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Peter Stiles, who's the medical director of the pain management program at Trio Orthopedic Center, where he practices full-time, treating a wide variety of pain diagnoses and disorders. He is double board certified in both anesthesiology and pain medicine, completing his advanced training at the University of Michigan. While in Ann Arbor, he designed a nationally recognized web-based system to aid patients and primary care physicians in the management of post-operative pain. Locally, he serves on the boards of the Twin Cities Medical Society Foundation and the Steve Rummler Hope Network. Dr. Stiles grew up in Bloomington and is a graduate of St. Olaf College and the University of Minnesota Medical School. Please help me welcome Dr. Peter Stiles.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. I'm going to jump right in because I've got to cover 5 years of training in 10 minutes. Couple disclosures. I don't really stand to make any money from anything I'm discussing today. I want to talk 4 things. Thinking about pain, which is kind of, in a lot of instances, the doorway into this whole terrible world of opioids and addiction, as a symptom of a problem, but also as a diagnosis itself. We'll briefly talk about something called opioid-induced hyperalgesia, the prescribing guidelines that have been mentioned earlier we'll touch on, and then explore some sustainable alternative non-opioid pain management strategies. When I see students and even patients, I will pose a hypothetical question. I'll show them 2 pictures, something like this, and say, which patient do you think is in more pain? And rhetorically, the real answer is we have no idea. Obviously, we think the one on the left would be in more pain, but the reality is pain is such a complicated biopsychosocial experience that a picture or even a diagnosis can't describe what someone is feeling. And the other troubling thing about pain is that we can get really good at it. There's a point at which pain stops becoming a symptom of a problem, a motor vehicle accident, a fall, a fracture, and becomes the problem or the diagnosis itself. One way I describe it to patients is like practicing any instrument. If you played piano for an hour a day, you would get really good at it after a year, right? Your fingers would get quicker, your brain would reorganize, you'd be able to type, you'd just be really good at music in general and piano. Imagine being in pain 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for years. You're going to be the best at pain from a neuroplastic perspective. And that's really a tough thing to understand and a tough thing to treat. As we heard, we thought we could treat it a little bit with opioids. We, of course, know we can't. We've actually been doing an even further disservice in that opioids will further sensitize someone to pain. The concept is called opioid-induced hyperalgesia. The definition there, nociceptive means pain sensing sensitization caused by exposure to opioids. There's a lot of complicated chemical processes at play. They did funny experiments on rats where they put them on hot plates after exposing them to different amounts of fentanyl. And I won't go into the details in interest of time, but here's how I explain it to my students and my patients. We're really good at adapting to things as people. Usually that's helpful. If you lift weights every day, your body will build more muscles to get stronger. If you go for a run every day, you will get faster and better at using oxygen. If you block your opioid receptor every day, you will develop more opioids. Your body thinks that we need to overcome that tonic exposure too. So, unfortunately, this is maladaptive in that we just become more sensitive to pain the longer someone is on opioids. If you need another reason to convince someone to come off. Turning our attention a little bit to what the government or some federal bodies, local bodies are starting to do about this. March 15th, 2016 was a really important day in my field because the CDC released their prescribing guidelines. This is the first time that it made it okay for an external body to try and influence a physician's practice around opioids. I remember sitting in a lecture hall being told how to initiate OxyContin. And it wasn't that long ago. I've only been doing this in my own practice for 4 years. So in my medical school training, I got that lecture that was sponsored by Purdue Pharma. So CDC gave some basic guidelines, and these are helpful, but they're very broad. States and individual health systems, and even some insurers, are going to start to put some teeth behind this. And I won't go through this in detail. This is a 70-page guideline simplified to one slide. I'm going to simplify the one slide to one statement, and that's don't use opioids for chronic pain. Use the lowest amount possible for acute pain, and use common sense when you're treating patients with what we currently know. That sums up mostly what we need to know in terms of guidelines. Establishing functional goals, looking at risks, checking urine drug screens, having daily limits and milligram morphine limits are all mixed up in these guidelines, and it's helpful when you get in the weeds. But for the purposes of this discussion, that initial statement is key. States and individual insurers have now actually started influencing this more. So you can tell a doctor what to do, and he'll say, I know best, I know my patients, and I'm probably guilty of this too. That doesn't apply to me, this patient, that doesn't matter. But when the insurance company says, we're just not going to pay for that therapy or that medication, now you've actually influenced what's happening. And another great example of this is Health Partners, which is my parent employer, has made a strong effort to decrease the amount of opioids going out. And I sit on a panel that tries to do this, and we thought about all the different ways we could do it. We could send out required lectures and send out pamphlets and all of this stuff. What we decided to do was go into the medical record and change the default. When you click the button that says Norco, from 30 tabs to 10 tabs. And overnight, prescribing dropped by 30%, and that's been sustained. So this is where the rubber meets the road. When we see insurers and systems buy into this, we can make real change. It was alluded to earlier, but just very recently, last week, Minnesota put out new prescribing guidelines, and I'm very proud of our state. These are forward-thinking, dovetail nicely with the CDC, but do a good job of dividing up acute pain, which is very different than chronic pain, and that critical transition point defined between 7 and 45 days after a tissue injury. And our state guidelines look at that and give ways to try and keep people from becoming habituated. So what's the utility of these guidelines? As someone who works with them and tries to interpret them, until we had guidelines, the point of contention was between the doctor and the patient, right? All of a sudden, I am the one who's saying we can't use this. And a patient who's convinced they need opioids, they're angry about that. And then the blame is put on the doctor. It's a really unhealthy dichotomy between the relationship. Once guidelines enter into that, you can point to this third party with a patient and say, you know what, I have to abide by these rules. I want to partner with you, keeping in mind that this is what we know, and work to come up with a plan that's safe and effective for you. So this has been a great utility. This, real briefly, and lucky, is the study that was referred to earlier out of the VA. All the studies for opioid effectiveness, and there aren't very many good ones, as Dr. Johnson said on the video, looked at using them for 6 to 12 weeks. 12 weeks was the longest study. This is a 12-month study saying that opioids are no more effective than non-opioid medications for pain, and in fact, maybe a little less effective at 1 year. We can talk more details on that later. So what do? Right? We have a lot of people in pain. There's an aging population. There's a lot of injuries. There's a lot of habituated patients. So how do we confront this? We gathered all the experts and all the people who know exactly what to do and got them in one room, and this is what it looked like. Because there is no right, if there were an easy way to do this, we would have done it already. None of us would be here. This is how I do it and how many people try to do it. Putting safe, effective, sustainable pain management as the goal with some supporting legs of that stool. I will touch on each of them over a minute and a half and we'll do it. This is what happens if you don't have a comprehensive approach for your stool. A pain doctor, myself, traditionally is thought of as someone who manages medications. We want to manage multimodal opioid-sparing medications by attacking the pain experience at every point along the pathway between peripheral tissue and the brain where it's ultimately felt. We can decrease side effects and usually treat pain a little bit better. There are certain procedures that can be helpful, and a procedure, even though that's how I make my living, is not an end in and of itself, but it is to facilitate the rest of the recovery from a painful condition. In general, we try to get rid of bad stuff, increase good stuff, and change the way electricity works in our spine in some fancy ways. Functional therapy or physical therapy is another leg of the stool, and more important than anything I do, it's to re-engage patients who are feeling pain with their body and that experience in a safe and paced manner so they can recover. I can guarantee that if you don't invest in your body, you will get older and you will hurt more. That's everyone, not just people with a disease of addiction, not just people with chronic pain. So investing in that is important. And PT is not a place you go or even a thing that you do, it's a lifestyle frame shift. Dr. DeLisi mentioned some behavioral components and strategies. This is critical. Pain affects mood and sleep and emotions and relationships. At the very least, it's important to recognize that, and many times in a patient who struggles with chronic pain, it's important to address that professionally with a pain psychologist, something that we will often overlook, or that traditional care to this point is often overlooked. And finally, at least for now, addiction medicine is the fourth leg of that pain management stool because of how exactly we've been treating pain for 2 decades inappropriately. It's wed to pain management. I hope there's a day where we don't have to sit on the same panel and I don't have to have an addiction resource in my office because we're managing pain in a different way. But we don't want to contribute to the statistics, so we do that. The nail and glue that kind of holds this whole stool together is different for different people, but I'm very open to alternative strategies, everything from acupuncture and breathing to massage, yoga, healing, touch, whatever engages a patient, empowers them to get better. I'm happy to explore, support, and engage with a patient in that way. So that's kind of a very brief, holistic approach at pain management that does not rely on opioids And I'll pass it off here.
Sheriff Stanek, a lifelong resident of Hennepin County, grew up in Northeast Minneapolis. That was my edit, Chief. He's serving his third term as the elected sheriff of Hennepin County and is a 35-year veteran of law enforcement. He began the Minneapolis PD, rising through the ranks from patrol officer to commander of criminal investigations. While serving as a police officer, he was elected 5 times to the Minnesota State Legislature. Sheriff Stanek has been a leading advocate in promoting prevention and intervention efforts, along with traditional law enforcement activities in the fight against illicit drugs. Under his leadership, the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office was the first law enforcement agency in the state to begin carrying the opioid overdose reversal drug naloxone. Locally, Sheriff Stanek is the past president of the Minnesota Sheriff's Association, and nationally, he's the second vice president of the National Sheriff's Association and the vice president of the Homeland Security Committee for the Major County Sheriffs of America. Please help me welcome our sheriff, Sheriff Rich Stanek.
Said that was a 5-minute introduction, so I'm cut down to 5 minutes now. Hey, so you heard from doctor, now you're going to hear from cop and cop. One thing piqued my interest when I was talking to the chief on the end there. You guys, the doctors talked about like something like biosocial neurological response. We're like, you know, you had us at opioid-induced constipation. Okay, so mine's going to be easy. I'll get right through this. Thanks very much for being here. Many of you heard me speak before about this. And by the way, where's Ann? All right, I counted them up. I was at St. Louis Park Rotary this morning, Minnetonka Rotary. I'm at the Edina Rotary at lunch, and if I understand correctly, you've got multiple Rotaries here. That's got to be an award. Okay. All right, that's me. That's me. Here's the deal. So, I just do a little straight shoot with Sheriff Stanek. Now, last year we had 175 people die in this county from opioid-related overdose deaths. The youngest was 16 years old, the oldest was 98 years old. 16-year-old girl, 98-year-old man. Look around the room, 175 people. There are about 140 of you here, right? So just wipe out this room plus some. Now, the year before that, we had 153. The year before that, we had 110. In 2 years, that's a 59+% increase in opioid-related overdose deaths. Now, what do you know about that? 2 things, right? Every single one's tragic. Every single one is prevented, right? Could be. And this is where all of you come in, my Rotarians, because you guys work really hard. You're civic leaders. You've all got nieces and nephews and sons and daughters and grandparents and extended family, and you all know someone out there who has an addiction issue, correct? You do. I know you do. And you can reach up and help them. We talked about this drug disposal piece, right? We've got 14 of these drug collection boxes across Hennepin County. Sheriff's Office has 6 of them. Many of the local police departments have them as well. It's not the only way to get rid of the narcotics. You can also get rid of them with what Rob's going to talk to you about, which are the disposal bags. And we give those out to residents. We'll be using them in National Night Out across the county. We will touch tens of thousands of people on National Night Out, as well as all the points in between. Over the last couple of years, we've taken over 140,000 pounds of unused, unwanted, expired meds from individuals like you, just because you turn them in, right? And you always wonder when you go to a pharmacy, CVS, Walgreens, wherever you go, now how come they don't take them back? How come they don't give you a bag attached to your prescription? Right? It's a good question. Everybody can do more. Let's see. We talked about naloxone a little bit. Cal, you got naloxone on you?
I do, sir.
Pull it out. You met Cal? Cal's a good-looking deputy. He works really hard. All of my deputies in the county carry naloxone. They carry it on them. Why? Every day, cops and firefighters across this county, because all of them now, look at the coverage map, all of them in this county carry what Cal has. It is a life-saving antidote, right? A couple weeks ago, we recognized 6 law enforcement agencies across Hennepin County that had over 50 saves in the past couple months. That's 50 people brought back to life that otherwise may not have made it, right? You still got to go to the emergency room, you still got to see the doctor, but they may not have made it. And people ask me all the time, well, what, come on, aren't you just enabling people to do this, right? No shame, no blame. We're in the business of saving lives. That's just the way it is. Somebody said to me when I came in, they used a great anecdotal example. If someone collapses over here in the corner and they're not breathing very well, what do you say? You shouldn't have bit off so much of that food, that chicken? No, you're going to give them CPR, right? A little Heimlich, a little chest compression, oxygen, and get them back going. Aren't you? Yep. Of course you are. All right. We took I run a jail. Did you know that? How many of you been to my jail? How many of you been there? Come on, no shame, no blame. That's okay, Don. A few others, I know. Look, my jail books about 40,000 people a year through the front doors. Not everybody who comes in is in the best of mood. So I wanted to take, your mom was right when she told you wear clean underwear. You clean up before you go out at night because those mugshots are not pretty. Not pretty. Having said that though, if you come into our jail, I decided to take a snapshot, right? I sit there about 850 people every single day in jail, waiting to see the judge for whatever it is that they're allegedly committing, because nobody's guilty of anything when they're in jail. It's only after you see the judge, due process. So I took a look at my inmates, 851 of them back on December 6th of 2017. Look at what we came up with. 173 of those 851 self-reported using opioids, right? 64% of those 111 overdosed. And look how many snapped back to life. 95% of those 105 who overdosed were revived with naloxone Narcan. Wow. Isn't that incentive enough, really? Everybody who comes into the jail gets offered naloxone Narcan on the way out. Through the generosity of the Rummler Foundation and the National Sheriff's Association, we're able to provide this to them. If they want it, we'll give it to them. Same thing with the law enforcement and the fire agencies across Hennepin County. Like I said, National Night Out. When you get out that first Monday or Tuesday in August, whatever day it is, at the block clubs, you're going to see your local police departments, and you're going to see the Hennepin County Sheriff's Office giving naloxone out to the residents. Now, not naloxone, the drug disposal bags. But if you want naloxone, where can you get it from? Well, you can go to the pharmacy and buy it, right? Do you need a prescription? No. No. Can you get it from Lexi and her group? Absolutely, yeah. Ask them.
Oh my goodness, that should have been an overwhelming yes!
They're tired, they ate, they had cookies, they had brownies, they want to get on. All right. Look at that good looking guy. He's the former chief of police, and he's really good at what he does. Come on up here.
Thank you, Sheriff. Now it's my honor to introduce Rob Reynolds. Rob joined Verity Technologies in July 2016 as the Director of Advocacy, helping coalitions, public safety, and environmental organizations implement the safe disposal of opioids through the use of deterrent packets. Prior to coming to Verity, he spent 31 years with the Eden Prairie Police Department. Here's the photo right here. Serving in various positions, including chief, for 9 years. Reynolds has lived in the Minneapolis area his entire life and is a graduate of the University of Minnesota, earning a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. Rob has also completed coursework in leadership through the Police Executive Research Forum at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. Please join me in welcoming Rob Reynolds.
Okay, there's good things and bad things about being the last speaker. The good thing is you do get to spend time and eat your whole meal in peace and digest and everything. The bad thing is that everyone has taken all of the good words already. So you're left with almost nothing when you get up there. And generally when I find myself in this position, as Josh mentioned, I had 31 years in law enforcement, so I always have in my pocket a good collection of variable stories with flexible endings that I can share. But unfortunately, there's people here from both Eden Prairie and Hennepin County and Edina Police Department, so they're going to call me out if I stretch out any of those stories. I will disclose that I was an Eden Prairie Noon Rotary member. But if you know Eden Prairie Noon Rotary, yeah, I'm admitting to something here, folks. So I do have a PowerPoint presentation. Last week I was at a presentation where someone had a PowerPoint and literally he had over 50 points on his PowerPoint, which he read. and he should have his PowerPoint license taken away because he read every single slide, every single word. So Josh has asked me to speed it up. I'm going to do a couple things here. I'm going to flip through my PowerPoint presentation. No, it says thank. Oh, that's otherwise. Even for a new Rotary. All right. So what I'm going to do is I will flip through this. I'm going to. What I say will be loosely related to what's on the slides, but you're all intelligent people. You can multitask. You can read the slides and listen to me at the same time, even if we're not completely in sync. Eden Prairie Newton Rotary will meet after, and I'll explain all this to you. Just a couple national statistics, and really some about Minnesota. And again, I won't go all over these. We have covered them. But a little maybe about what I do. What I do right now is I work as the Director of Advocacy for Verde Technologies. Verde produces a product called Deterra. I'll talk about that in a little bit. But right now I have the opportunity to go all over the country and meet with groups. Mostly I work with government, nonprofit, and nonprofit organizations, mostly coalitions who are out there fighting, trying to get the word out, trying to educate people on the opioid addiction and its relation to the heroin crisis that we have in this country right now. And they are a wonderful group of people, and I am honored and excited every day to sit down and work with them because they are out on the front lines doing things. And really, when you come to a program like this, you wonder what is it that I can do? Because as you listen to all the previous speakers, this is huge, right? This is not something I can go home and just fix on my own. As a matter of fact, as you leave here today, you're probably going to be wondering two things. The first thing you're going to think is, man, that was really a well-orchestrated program. There are a lot of great speakers, and I have a lot of good information, but somewhere along the lines, the whole thing just sort of left the tracks and it went out of control. So the first thing I'll help you with is I'll tell you where that happened. It's right here, right now, when I got up to speed. The second thing you're going to be wondering is, what is it I can do about this? And the problem is actually so overwhelming that you're probably going to feel helpless. This isn't something I can do something about. This is something only the doctors can do, only the pharmacists can do, law enforcement, something like that. I really can't do anything. You can do things, and there's two things you have to do. You have to change the paradigm on two things. The way you look at and think about addiction, and the way you manage your own materials. Again, yeah, two things going on here. So the first thing is addiction, especially when you're talking about heroin addiction. And heroin addiction is something that's super closely tied to the opioid addiction. We always think of it as something that doesn't happen in our families, it doesn't happen in our communities, and it definitely can't happen to us. We would never let that happen to us. Nobody that is addicted to heroin, nobody that is addicted to opioids thought that that was going to happen to them. Most of them got there one small step at a time. And most of us won't talk about it. If I asked, or in this room or anywhere around here, if we asked in this room how many people were affected by opioids, maybe 1% of the people would raise their hand, maybe up to 5%, something like that. If I spoke to a room like this in Ohio, absolutely every hand would go up. Absolutely every hand, because they're becoming a little more used to talking about it. They're becoming the opioid epidemic. If you follow it on a map, you'll find, and when I first went to these areas, I was absolutely devastated to hear what's going on. And the good thing about being in the Midwest is we lag behind, right? A little bit from the coast, a little behind in fashion, a little behind in whatever it is. But to be behind in opioid epidemic is a good thing because we can learn about what happens there. So we need to start talking about this thing freely right now. All of us have been around the campfire or something like that, and our neighbor will say, hey, I'm going in for knee surgery, but they're going to give me some good drugs at the end, but everybody has kind of a chuckle. I think after you've heard what you've heard here today, you'll probably just keep quiet about it because you don't want to be part of it. But what I'm asking you to do is talk about it. You know, say, hey, did you know that those opioids are really addictive? And launch a conversation and be comfortable about launching that. It's uncomfortable, but the more you do it, the easier it will become. Because it's absolutely critical that we talk about this. You'll go to places and you'll talk to people who have lost loved ones, and instead of talking about it, they'll absolutely cover it up. I've worked with families who have lied about the deaths of their dead relatives. They've said they died because of a heart condition or something like that, when really it was an opioid epidemic. And keeping it, an opioid overdose. And keeping it quiet does no good at all. We need to talk about it so that those that are impacted by it will talk about it. You also need to recognize who this can happen to. I said in the beginning, you don't think it's going to happen to you. You want to know what the opioid, the person that's addicted to opioids looks like? Look around this room, because this is what it looks like. Anyone from a pre-teenager to a senior. This knows no socioeconomic, this knows no geographical boundary, it knows no age boundary. Everybody is. As a matter of fact, there's probably many people in this room right now that are currently impacted by this. So we need to change our paradigm on how we look at this. We need to talk about it, we need to challenge it, you need to take care of yourselves and your family. We talked about alternative pain medicines. The one thing that wasn't mentioned was that Minnesota is a partial fill state. If you receive a pain a prescription for a pain medication and it's for 30 tablets, you can go in and ask for 10 tablets. I don't want the whole thing. I only want a part of this. One of the first exposures that most teenagers get to opioids is through a tooth extraction. Have a conversation with your oral surgeon as to whether that's needed. Is there anything else we can do? So you need to take responsibility for yourselves and your loved ones about what type of medication you can do. So there's two things you can do. You can talk about it, you can manage your own thing. The next thing we need to do is change the paradigm of how we manage our own medications. We are really good at developing medications. We're really good at prescribing them. We're really good at dispensing them, going and picking them up because we're in pain, we need them. Where we drop the ball is, what do we do with them after we're done? And I go back, I'm looking around the room, I'm not guessing, but there's a lot of people my age here. And if you go back to when you were probably a teenager and you used half a can of paint, you would toss the other half a can in the garbage can without thinking twice about it. Some of us even had garbage cans with holes on it, and we'd light the thing on fire and watch it burn. And today, you know, we all had those garbage cans. You can get them at the hardware store. But today, there's no way. I mean, unfortunately, I have a garage full of paint cans because I wouldn't think of throwing them away. We need to do that with our medications, because what we do know is that 80% of the people that are abusing opioids or heroin are getting them from the medicine cabinets of their friends and family. And again, you'll think, no, that doesn't happen to me. It does happen to you. You might not even know that it's happened. There are daytime burglars that are doing things, that are going into people's homes solely for the purpose of getting those medications, whether it's for their own use or whether it's to sell so that they can support a heroin epidemic. It shouldn't happen to anyone. It has, I know for sure it's happened twice in my own family. My mother-in-law had it taken away the traditional way. Someone went into their bathroom to use the bathroom, took the pills, admitted to it later. My mom was socially engineered out of hers. She had the knee surgery, couldn't stand the way they made her feel. Went back home, or went back to work. It runs in the family, but she couldn't stop talking, so she told her boss that, you know, I had these medications, they made me sick, so on and so forth. Well, her boss says, oh, this is, you know, that's exactly what my doctor gives me. If you're not using them, I'll take them. My mom says, well, hey, you know, I paid for these, they're worth something. Someone might as well use them. She also had to be admitted for opioid treatment because of an addiction, and then admitted to my mom what had happened. My mom related the story to me, and it's like, thanks, Mom, I'm the chief of police in Edina, and you're a drug dealer. We have to change the way we paradigm, or change the paradigm of how we manage our own pharmaceuticals in our own home. And that's the product that Verde Environmental markets can help you with that. And the way I got involved with this is we actually use these at Eden Prairie Police Department. We didn't have a take-back box, but if you came into our lobby, we would give you we will give you one of these pouches so that you can take them home and get rid of your unused pharmaceuticals. And what it is it's just Josh has actually bought one for everyone here today. So as you leave, pick one of these up, because this is something you can do today. Most of the time, and thanks Josh for doing that, but most of the time you come to one of these events and you go home and at best you'll share the information. Now you can kind of take the awareness that you have because of being here and turn it into action. What you do is you just put your unused medications in here. It works on pills, patches, or liquids. Fill it up about halfway full of warm water, and then leave it sit for about 30 seconds because some air comes out of our product, but then just zip it up and throw it away in the household trash. What doTERRA does is two things. The first thing it does is deactivates the medication. It's the only at-home product out there that does that. It deactivates it, so once our process has taken place, the process is called adsorption. The drug is of no use to anyone whatsoever. It meets the DEA standards of deactivation because it's permanently unavailable for abuse or diversion. And that's different than what you'll see places where they say put it in coffee grounds, put it in sawdust, put it in kitty litter. That's absorption. That's just basically a sponge. This is adsorption with a D, and what it is the molecules of the pharmaceutical make a permanent bond with our product. Once that bond happens, the drug is of no use to anyone whatsoever. Like I said, it does meet DEA standards. They can't endorse anything, but the DEA actually uses our product in all of their educational programs. So take this home and start cleaning out your medicine cabinets. If you have more medicine that's going to fit, we have different size pouches. The one you're going to get does 45 pills, 6 ounces of liquid, or 6 patches. If you run out of things, if you need more space, you can get these pouches. If you live in the Southwest Metro here, they're available at Edina PD, Eden Prairie PD, Plymouth, Minnetonka, and Hopkins have some through a donation by Hopkins, one source, a prevention organization. So go get some more. There's drop boxes. So that's the thing you can do, is start changing the paradigm of how you manage your own medication to include closing the loop on the life cycle of those pharmaceuticals. Get them out of your home, because even though you don't think it's going to happen to you, just like I didn't think it could ever happen in my family, it absolutely can. And it's not some stranger breaking into your home. Unfortunately, it's your good friends. It can be your kids experimenting, or it can be your kids' friends. So thanks very much. That was the hook. Right? Thank you.
Okay. Let's take some questions. Anyone out there have a burning desire? We're gonna just go to questions straight away. Mr. Kleins.
Where can there are places where I could take my medicines. I have a box of unused medicines at home. Instead of just using this, I don't have to just use this bag you talked about. I could bring the unused medicines to where?
Yeah, where do you live?
Edina.
Edina? Does Edina have a drop box?
So the Southville does. Southdale Library.
Southdale Library.
Yes,
I can just bring this box in.
Bring as many as you want.
And then I go to that.
In the green, the green bin that looks like a mailbox. And we'll take it. Doesn't matter if you have your name on it or not.
Cough medicine, pain medicine, whatever. I just chuck the whole works right in there.
We'll take it.
Go ahead, Don.
I want to know if the street opioids I heard are laced sometimes with fentanyl, and that they, however, come not from the United States, but from outside the United States. Can you comment on that, maybe Dr. Lindsay or Dr. Stanek?
Sure. So in terms of synthetic opioids that are on the street, that are not the legal prescription variety, it is true that they typically are coming from other countries. One of the biggest sources of in particular the different derivatives of fentanyl, is from China.
One concern, or something that makes it more dangerous, is some of the pills are engineered to look like a 5 milligram oxycodone, but it's stronger. And that's a marketing thing, but if you know that I can take 20 milligrams of oxycodone and get the response I want, but there's fentanyl in that too, that's when it gets even more dangerous.
Go ahead, Don.
There's also been reports of marijuana being laced with fentanyl, and fentanyl looking like a benzodiazepine, like Xanax, which is an anxiety medication.
I have a question. So one of you said that nobody got addicted. They never thought they were going to get addicted, but it was a step-by-step process. And sometimes when I hear this topic being talked about, it sounds like it just sort of happens to you. Like I might go into the doctor for a knee surgery and now I'm going to become addicted. That's actually scary. Is it a step-by-step process, or is it if I take one of these drugs now I'm addicted?
So the answer is both, unsatisfyingly. For some individuals, it is more of a step-by-step gradual process, and it's just exposure to that drug of abuse and a rewiring of the brain. There are individuals, though, who have more of a genetic predisposition, and so that disease process can be more rapid. It's really very similar to other chronic illnesses. Think about people who have heart disease, and you have some people who develop their heart disease in their 30s, and there's others who develop it in their 70s. Diabetes early on versus the diabetes later in life. So part of it is what you're exposed to, part of it is what your genetic predisposition is.
Does not alcohol work on the same brain sensors that we're talking about here with opioids?
So that's a great question, and it was one of the things that I cut out of my part of the presentation, trying to hit that 10-minute mark, which I missed. Yes. So alcohol, all of the drugs of abuse, alcohol being included in that group, do affect and result in a what's called supraphysiologic or excessive release of dopamine, like I talked about. So that's where it is the same. But each of the different substances work in different other parts of the brain. What makes opioids different, and why we're talking about it today, is yes, it hits the reward pathway, it gives you that euphoria, but it also hits the pain system and relieves pain. That's not just physical pain, but that's psychic or psychological pain. And then third, something that you're going to hear more and more about, is that our endogenous opioids, those endorphins, they also are linked to our attachment centers of the brain. And when I say attachment, I'm talking about relationships. Some of you may have heard of the hormone oxytocin. Oxytocin is that hormone that is released when a woman has given birth and is breastfeeding, and they have that attachment to the child almost instantaneously. That's not just oxytocin. It's oxytocin plus that opioid. And when you are abusing an opioid, you are activating and you are creating that attachment to a way that nothing else is. And I can tell you from having done this for almost 20 years, we deal with patients who are opioid dependent around relationships and attachment, and we see how they've actually formed attachments to their drug. That's true of other drugs, but not in the same way that it is true of the opioids.
How about a round of applause for our panel today?
So some quick. I'll make one more comment. Okay, so someone asked me in the back of the room about naloxone. I just wanted to clarify, every single citizen in our state, not only law enforcement, not only first responders, but all of you get to carry the antidote, and all of you absolutely should have it if you have anybody in your life who takes opioids at all, even as prescribed, not addicted. You can go to our website, there's a calendar there. It gives you all the places that we do free and public training, where we teach you all about how to recognize an opioid overdose and how to respond, and it's free, and you leave with the antidote. Okay? Thanks.
Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I want to just follow up on that with a few things we can do as we walk out the door. As I was listening to the presentation, one thing we can do, we now have this great online curriculum that we all helped fund and get off the ground. Share this with a school district where you come from. They have special questions for different demographics going through this curriculum, but our youth should be exposed to this information immediately. It's something we can do tangibly leaving here. The second thing is, let's extend the speakers panel. Invite these guys and gals to come out to your club and have an opioid workshop yourself. It's very easy to just have them come and speak and get the word out. The third thing is, pick up that deterrent packet out the door. If you're not going to use it to dispose of your own opioids, if you don't have any unused opioids, give it to a friend and neighbor and tell them the story of what happened today. The fourth thing is, if you know anyone who is an addict, or if you know a friend or family member who has a son or daughter who's an addict, help them get the treatment options that Dr. DeLisi talked about today. So, I'd now like to invite Ann Platt to come up and close us out.
Josh, before you leave, there's an event coming up on May 21st. Do you want to explain a little bit about that?
Oh, that's right, the district conference. Anyone registered here for the district conference, Rotarians? Okay, well, all of you who made this possible will be recognized at the district conference for the curriculum and the workshop. We want you to come and check it out, come up on stage and celebrate with us all these wonderful clubs that collaborated with us so we can continue to work on this issue. Thank you.
And in case anybody is wondering, it will be during the morning session that the award will be given out. I need to thank our panelists. I think Sheriff Stanek has left already, but thank you, Lexi, Dr. Stephen, Dr. Peter, Sheriff Stanek, and Rob. I think Rob has left also. Thank you for Peter was hiding you. Thank you for your wonderful presentations today and to educate all of us on how we can control this epidemic as we move forward. Rotary is a global organization of over 1.2 million business leaders, professionals, and educators that join together to make a difference in not only their communities, but regionally and worldwide. In honor of your presentations today, we will give a gift to the Steve Rummler Network, Hope Network, in your honor. So thank you very much. I would like to close with a quote. Many times we think about this opioid epidemic as hopeless and where do we go? And it's each one of us taking one step at a time. My quote today kind of pertains a little bit to the hope that we need. When everything seems to be going against you, remember that the airplane takes off against the wind, not with it. It's by Henry Ford. Thank you for attending. Thank you, Rotarians, for making a difference. Have a great week. Meeting adjourned.